Sri Ramayanam, an incredibly important ancient Indian historical document. What, according to billions of people over thousands of years, they believe that Sri Ramayanam shaped up the very ethos of India what we know today. Sri Ramayanam, despite being a sacrosanct scripture for Sanatana Dharma, has a controversial and often contentious addendum called as Uttara Ramayanam or Uttara Kanda. And there are a vivid set of positions and stances and narratives about Uttara Ramayanam. Some say Uttara Ramayanam is a prakshipt, some believe that it really happened. Whatever may be the case, after all, what is the truth? Was Uttara Ramayanam real or is it a myth? This is one single question that we will try to probe with a very critical approach in this documentary film. And with that said, let's get started. Well, this glass is half filled with water. Or this glass is half empty. Well, this glass, serving half a glass of water, is a sign of poor hospitality. We need to save water. Just serve half glass. If needed, then refill it. Wondering what are these? See, basically today's world, you can build your narrative the way you want around whichever prop or an entity that you want. The reason I'm bringing this up is Uttara Ramayanam has always been a subject to different kinds of narratives, people trying to impose their opinions on whether it is real or a myth. Just like this glass of water, I can build the narrative the way I want, and that is what people have always been doing with regards to Uttara Ramayanam. And the reason for this is their strong emotional connect or disconnect or aversion, either ways, for or against, towards Ramayana. So to move any further in this documentary, I would like to clarify my position that I would like to be emotionally disconnected from Ramayanam to understand the truth. Because your opinion will definitely blind you from truth. And to see what is truth, you should emotionally disconnect yourselves from that entity, for or against, whichever way. So in this doc film, I will put aside my devotional emotions towards Sri Ramayanam and will be assuming an atheistic standpoint, and I will be analyzing Uttara Ramayanam as an atheist going forward in this doc film, just to stay neutral and unbiased to find out what is the truth. So as usual, let's cut this doc film into 4 parts. The first chapter is the background and context about Uttara Ramayanam. What is Uttara Ramayanam and why it has always been very controversial part of Sri Ramayanam. And in the second chapter, let's try and understand the structure and storyline of Sri Ramayanam and inherently about Uttara Ramayanam as well. Because if you want to understand whether Uttara Ramayanam is real or not, first of all, you should understand what is its storyline, its contents, etc. So that's what we'll see in the second chapter. And then comes the most important part of this doc film, the third chapter, a critical analysis about Uttara Ramayanam. An in-depth analysis that I could afford to try and understand if Uttara Ramayanam is for real or is it a myth. And the fourth one, the conclusion. So as you can see, there's a lot of information packed up into this doc film. So I'll try to make it as crisp as possible. But still, the video length will be definitely longer. And as you might know, I have no interest in making short, entertaining videos because that's not my objective. How many views this video is going to get, that's least of my concerns. I'm making this documentary for those of you who are very interested to understand the facts about Uttara Ramayana. Those who are interested will watch, and those who are not interested will not. But end of the day, this is truth. And truth is not a 2-minute Maggi noodles. So let's get to the first chapter, the background and context about Uttara Ramayana and why in first place that question arises whether Uttara Ramayana is real or myth. As I said that I'd be assuming an atheistic standpoint throughout this doc film, a very pertinent question that I should ask myself before even getting to Uttara Ramayana is Sri Ramayanam for real or is it just a myth? I'm not even getting to the question of whether Sri Rama is an avatar of Vishnu or is a god and all that stuff. My simple question is Sri Ramayanam for real? Did it happen really in history or not? This is the very first question that we should ask sensibly, all of us. And to find an answer to the question of the historicity about Sri Ramayanam, we need to have a broader premise to start with. Take a look at this. This is the complete landscape of the Vedic education system. And there are hundreds of scriptures in this landscape, and there are thousands of stories in them. This complete Vedic education system, augmented with 18 Puranas, 18 Smritis, 213 Agamas, and thousands of Siddhantas. All in all, there are tens of thousands of stories across this landscape of knowledge. And there is one story which is often retold in many of the scriptures, that is Sri Ramayanam. Almost all the 18 Puranas retell the story of Sri Ramayanam. Many Smritis take inspiration from Sri Ramayanam. So, as an atheist, sensibly, the question that I should ask myself if I want to know the historicity about Sri Ramayanam is, why? Why is that Sri Ramayanam so very popular in Bharat over thousands of years and billions of people revere it as a sacrosanct? If I try to find an answer to this question in that pursuit, I will get to know the historicity of Sri Ramayanam. I will leave this here because our main focus is Uttara Ramayanam and not Sri Ramayanam. But just to make things complete, I just briefly touched upon this aspect, which is a very pertinent question. There are hundreds of versions of Sri Ramayanam across different languages, different countries, especially in Bharat, the Indian subcontinent, as well as in the Southeast Asian countries. But when we would like to understand and analyze Sri Ramayanam more for its facts and truth, there is only one master version, which is written by Valmiki Maharshi, the original version of Sri Ramayanam. This is the only reliable account when you would like to analyze things from a historical standpoint. Not Tulasidasa Ramcharitmanas, not Kamba Ramayanam, not any other regional versions. So in this entire analysis, we will consider Sri Ramayanam written by Valmiki Maharshi as the baseline. And anyone who reads Valmiki Ramayanam definitely know this. There are a lot of myths about Sri Ramayanam. Thanks to the television serials and the movies, and not to find a fault with them, but there are a lot of myths that have been peddled. And some of them, for instance, are the first one, Ahalya's curse as a rock. Most of you know the story where Sri Rama's feet accidentally touches a rock and the rock becomes a lady whose name is Ahalya, who gets free from her curse with the touch of Sri Rama's feet. Now, withstanding to my atheistic point of view throughout this doc film, I'm not going to get into the theological aspects of it, how it happened, was it a magic and all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is, this is wrong. Ahalya's curse as a rock, the scene that we know, is not correct. The actual scripture of Valmiki Ramayana says that Ahalya was not lying as a rock, but she was in the form of an invisible dust. And the moment Sri Rama enters in that ashrama region, she gets redeemed from her curse and becomes a normal human being. And here is the biggest twist. It is not Ahalya who touches the feet of Sri Rama, but it's totally the other way around as per Valmiki Ramayana. It is Sri Rama who touches the feet of Ahalya, who is the age of his own mother, and that is the fact as per Valmiki Ramayana. And here I gave the reference for you to check should you be interested. Once Ahalya gets redeemed from her curse, she treats Sri Rama and Lakshmana as her own children and she feeds them as per Valmiki Ramayana. Same way, another myth about Sri Ramayanam is Ravana being present at Sita Swayamvar. Can you guess what is the biggest myth here? Yeah, of course, Ravana was never present at Sita Swayamvar. But Sita Swayamvar never happened in first place. As per Valmiki Ramayana, there was no Sita Swayamvar at all. In movies and other narrations, we see that Sri Ram breaks the Shivadhanu and immediately Sita comes with a garland. And that's when their wedding happens. But right from the moment when Sri Rama breaks the Shivadhanu up until the wedding of Sita Ram, there are 8 chapters in Balakanda. It was not a Swayamvar. It was a proper marriage, a wedding ritual that spans across 8 chapters. And Sita was not even present in a moment when Sri Ram broke the Shivadhanu. This is again another big myth about Ramayana. And what I just narrated is straight out of Valmiki Ramayana, and here are the references. Same way, another myth, there was never a Lakshman Rekha. Lakshmana asks Sita to stay safe in the ashram and just he leaves. Same way, Shabari tasting the fruits for its sweetness before offering to Sri Ram. This is also a myth according to Valmiki Maharshi's Sri Ramayana. Another myth is the squirrel's help in building Ramasetu. No, it was not present in Valmiki Ramayana. Biggest myths of all is Sita Agni Pariksha. Choice of words is extremely important. Agni Pariksha means a test through fire, but it is not an Agni Pariksha, but it is an Agni Pravesha, which is an act of suicide that Sita tries to commit on hearing the harsh words from her husband Sri Ram. Like this, there are a lot of myths about Sri Ramayanam. When we take Valmiki Ramayana as a baseline, then we can iron out all these myths. which are not present in the original scripture. Now the reason I'm quoting all this is, same way for Uttara Ramayana also, there are a lot of myths around it, and to set the context, I've been briefing through these myths which have been in popular belief but are not present in Valmiki Ramayana. Now let's get to the core and crux of Uttara Ramayana. As I said, of the 4 chapters, this first chapter is all about the background and context about Uttara Ramayana. So here it is. Totally, the entire Valmiki Ramayana is of 6 chapters or 6 books. Balakanda, Ayodhyakanda, Aranyakanda, Kishkindakanda, Sundarakanda and Yuddhakanda. And then there is an addendum to the 6 books, the 7th one, which is called as Uttara Kanda. It is also well known as Uttara Ramayanam. Now some people believe that Uttara Ramayanam is an integral part of Sri Ramayanam and is very much written by Valmiki Maharshi himself, while a majority of the people believe that Uttara Ramayanam is a prakshipt, that means it is not written by Valmiki Maharshi but is authored by one or more anonymous authors and is added as an addendum to the 6 books of Sri Ramayanam. We will try to probe both sides of these opinions, whether it is really written by Valmiki Maharshi or not. But the major contentions or the controversies around Uttara Ramayanam, there are 3 of them. And these 3 are the main reasons why people tend to deny that Uttara Ramayanam is not written by Valmiki Maharshi but is later added as a prakshipt. And here are these 3 major contentions. The first one is Sita Parityaga, an incident where Sri Rama abandons his pregnant wife Sita into the jungle. And the second incident is Sri Rama being the reason for Lakshmana's death. And the third one is Sri Rama killing Shambhuka, a Sudra who's trying to perform tapasya or a penance, and Sri Rama kills him. Now we'll get to the details of these contentions in a short while. But these are the 3 main reasons why people chose to deny that Uttara Ramayanam is not part of Valmiki Sri Ramayana, while some people argue that it is very much part of Sri Ramayana. And this is the reason why Uttara Ramayanam has always been very controversial with a lot of contentions. But are these 3 incidents for real or are they just myths? Just like what we saw, there are a lot of deviations, right? From the Sri Ramayanam written by Valmiki Maharshi versus what is in the popular belief. There are a lot of deviations and assumptions and narratives around. Like that, are these 3 perceived contentions about Uttara Ramayana for real or myth? It's a very sensitive subject, but let's try to find out what really is the truth. And that brings us to the second chapter, the structure and storyline of Sri Ramayanam. Eventually, let's try and understand what are the contents of Uttara Ramayanam. Most of us know the storyline of Ramayanam, but just for a quick recap, the first chapter or the first book is called as Balakanda, and this chapter completely elaborates about the birth of Sri Rama, the Vidyabhyasam, his education, his boyhood up until his marriage with Sita Devi. In the second chapter, Ayodhyakanda details about the exile of Sri Rama, Sita Devi and Lakshmana upon the wish of his mother Kaikeyi and death of his father Dasharatha. And the third chapter is Aranyakanda, which illustrates about the exile life of Sri Rama, Sita Devi and Lakshmana and the encounters with Kara and Dushana Rakshasas, Shurpanaka rebuked by Rama, abduction of Sita Devi by Ravana and so on. And the fourth chapter is Kishkindakanda, where Rama and Lakshmana meets the armies of Sugriva, the Vanarasena and Hanuman. Rama kills Vali to save Sugriva and the Vanarasena sets on search for Sita Devi. And then comes Sundarakanda, where Hanuman crosses the sea to Lanka, delivers the message of Rama towards Sita. Hanuman sets Lanka on fire and delivers the message of Sita towards Rama, acknowledging her safety. And finally the sixth one, Yuddhakanda. It narrates about Sri Rama building the Rama Setu with the help of Vanarasena and the Rama Ravana Yuddha, and finally Rama's return to Ayodhya and he being coronated as a king of Ayodhya. This is where the storyline of Sri Ramayanam, or what's popularly known as Valmiki Ramayanam, ends. Most of us very well know the storyline of Sri Ramayanam, but when it comes to Uttara Ramayanam, most of us have no clue about what are its contents, what is the story that is narrated as part of Uttara Ramayanam. And here it is. There are 111 sargas or chapters in which the entire Uttarakanda is narrated. Chapters 1 till 34, the first 34 chapters of Uttara Kanda, completely details about the history of Ravanasura, right from his birth and all the atrocities that he have committed. That is almost 30% of Uttara Ramayanam is all about Ravanasura. And then Sargas 35 to 36 details about the history of Hanuman, his birth and his childhood, and broadly the history of Hanuman in these two Sargas. And then from Sargas 37 to 41, certain incidents that happened during the early days of the beginning of Sri Rama Rajya, certain developments that happened in the court of Sri Rama during his early days as a king. That's narrated in these Sargas. Next comes Sargas 42 to 52, the major events of conception of Sita Devi and Sita Parityaga, that is Rama renouncing Sita Devi into the jungle. These incidents are narrated from Sargas 42 to 52 of Uttara Ramayana. And then from Sargas 53 to 72, Shatrughna, one of the brothers of Sri Rama, he kills Lavanasura, another demon king who commits atrocities on people back then. So that is detailed between 53 to 72 Sargas of Uttarakhand. Then comes Sargas 73 to 83, Shambhuka Vadha by Sri Rama. How and why Sri Rama kills Shambhuka, a Sudra who was living an ascetic life. Further next from Sargas 84 to 94, Ashwamedha Yagam, performed by Sri Rama, is detailed out. And from Sargas 95 to 99, Sri Rama's encounter with his sons Lava and Kusha, and finally Sita's end of life. These incidents are detailed out right from 95 to 99 Sargas. Up next is Sargas 100 up until 102, Coronation of the next generation. The sons of Sri Rama, Lakshmana, Bharata and Shatrughna, all four of them, their children getting coronated as the next generation to different kingdoms ranging from modern day Afghanistan, Pakistan and across India, with references to the places in today's world, are detailed out in Uttara Ramayana. Two cities, Takshaka and Pushkala, which are currently located in Pakistan, were the two kingdoms coronated for the children of Bharata, whose names are Takshaka and Pushkala. And in the name of Takshaka came the university, what we know today as Takshasila. All these details are given in Uttara Ramayana about the places, the coronation, the kingdoms and all. And finally, the Sargas 103 to 111, Sri Rama and his brothers, end of life. And that's the end of Uttara Ramayanam and as a whole of Sri Ramayanam as well. So this is the complete storyline about Uttara Ramayanam. Now that you got to see what are the contents of Uttara Ramayanam, let's try and get to the main question, the elephant in the room. Did Valmiki Maharshi write the entire Uttara Ramayanam, or is it just a myth or a prakshit? Let's try to analyze that specific question, the whole purpose of this documentary. And that brings us to the third chapter of this doc film, a critical analysis of Uttara Ramayanam. As I said, these are the three major contentions about Uttara Ramayanam, because of which people tend to disagree that Uttara Ramayanam is not part of Valmiki Ramayanam, while some people say that it is very much an integral part of Sri Ramayanam, written by Valmiki Maharshi. So before moving any further, I would like to re-emphasize 2 points again. Number one, our frame of reference is purely Valmiki Maharshi's Sri Ramayanam. And the second point is my atheistic standpoint in analyzing the Uttara Ramayana. I consciously want to avoid any kind of devotional or spiritual approach towards Uttara Ramayana because it will inherently induce a sense of bias for or against towards Uttara Ramayana. So to stay neutral, we will continue to analyze it from an atheistic standpoint. To understand the real truth about Uttara Ramayanam, I shaped up my entire analysis into 10 different points. Each and every point of these 10 are absolutely undisputable. Come what may, these are undisputable facts, and we'll see why I'm saying so. And most important of all, the 10th point, the big open secret. We'll see what it is, and that will flip the reality 180 degrees and tilt the scales for sure. And that 10th point will completely change your perception about Uttara Ramayanam. Now before getting to the big open secret, let's start from point number 1. So without further ado, let's get started. The first point of analysis is the name of the epic, Sri Ramayanam. And this is what Valmiki Maharshi said about the name of his epic. Kavyam Ramayanam Krutsnam Sitayas Charitam Mahat Paulascha Vadhamityevam Chakara Charita Vrataha. The meaning of this sloka is Valmiki Maharshi gave 3 names to this epic. Number 1 is Ramayanam, that means the journey of Rama. And number 2 is Sita Charitam, which means the history of Sita. And the third one is Paulascha Vadha, that means the killing of Paulascha. Paulascha is also another name for Ravana. So 3 names, Ramayanam, Sita Charitam and Paulascha Vadha. These are the 3 names of this epic. Now let's take a deeper look. Going by the name of Paulascha Vadha, what we can infer is Ramayanam ends with the killing of Ravana and justifies the title Paulascha Vadha. So there is no scope for any Uttara Kanda. At the end of Yuddha Kanda, Ravana gets killed by Sri Rama, and that's where the story ends. So where is the need for any further extension of this epic called as Paulascha Vadha? So we can put forward an argument saying that Uttara Ramayanam is not authentic. Valmiki Maharshi concluded the epic with the killing of Ravana, and there is no Uttara Kanda that was written by Valmiki Maharshi. Now this is one side of the argument, but there is a counter argument as well. If you recall, I said that 30% of Uttara Kanda is all about the history of Ravana and the atrocities that he have committed. All the details that are given in Uttara Kanda justifies why Ravana was so demonic and why people wished for his death. Now Uttara Kanda justifies a lot more to the title of Paulascha Vadha, because if you just look at Sri Ramayanam, other than abducting Sita, there was no other crime that essentially Ravana commits. It's more of a personal battle between Rama and Ravana. But that's not the case. At the end of the story, everybody hails Rama for killing Ravana. For what reason? All those reasons are justified in Uttara Kanda about Ravana, citing all the atrocities that he have committed. So my counter argument is Uttara Kanda is authentic because that essentially justifies why Ravana has to be killed, and eventually justifying the title Paulascha Vadha. And another argument supporting that Uttara Kanda is authentic is going by the title Sita Charitam. If you just look at the 6 Kandas, the history of Sita ends with the coronation of Rama as king and Sita as queen. But if Valmiki Maharshi really want to call this epic as Sita Charitam, then there are 2 important phases of the life of Sita that are missing in Sri Ramayanam. That is, number 1, her reign as a queen alongside Sri Rama. And the second one is she becoming mother of Lava and Kusa. 2 very important phases of a woman's life, and needless to say, her end of life. All these important phases about Sita are detailed out in Uttara Kanda. The title Sita Charitam could be justified only if we add Uttara Kanda also as an integral part of Ramayanam. That makes the complete history of Sita. So Uttara Kanda is very much part of the broader picture of Sri Ramayanam, and it is very much written by Valmiki Maharshi. Now these are just arguments. Try to understand what I am saying. I'm just trying to put forward the arguments and counter arguments on whether Uttara Kanda is authentic or not. So these are the arguments that we can draw from the name of this epic, Ramayana. Up next is the second point of analysis, the writing style of Sri Ramayanam. As you know that Sri Ramayanam has 6 kandas or 6 books, if we can call it that way, and each of these books have chapters called as sargas. So the first book, which is Bala Kanda, holds a lot of clues to understand if Uttara Ramayanam is authentic or not, whether it is written by Valmiki Maharshi or not. The first sarga of Bala Kanda is called as Sankshipta Ramayanam. It is basically a conversation between Narada Maharshi and Valmiki Maharshi, where Narada Maharshi narrates the entire story about Sri Rama to Valmiki Maharshi in 100 slokas, and then asks Valmiki Maharshi to elaborate this 100 slokas into a full-blown epic, and that gave rise to what we know today as Valmiki Maharshi's Sri Ramayanam. So basically the first sarga of Bala Kanda is the complete Sri Ramayanam in a nutshell, in just 100 slokas. Now let's draw our arguments. A straight and strong argument is Sankshipta Ramayanam ends with Rama killing Ravana and Rama and Sita returning to Ayodhya and Rama getting coronated as the king of Ayodhya. That's where the story of Sankshipta Ramayanam stops. And when it's elaborated, it perfectly matches with the 6 kandas of Sri Ramayanam. So one argument is Uttara Ramayanam is not authentic, as the story of Sankshipta Ramayanam ends with Rama getting coronated as the king of Ayodhya, and so is the end of Yuddha Kanda. So there is no need for any Uttara Kanda as per this writing style of Sri Ramayanam. But still there is another counter argument to this as well. If we try to take a deeper look into Sankshipta Ramayanam, the whole of Rama Ravana Yuddha, basically the entire Yuddha Kanda, is just narrated in one sloka in Sankshipta Ramayanam. But towards the end of Sankshipta Ramayanam, there are 7 slokas. I repeat the word 7 slokas detailing out how was Ramarajya. And Uttara Kanda essentially is all about how was Ramarajya, how Rama ruled as a king. So a sensible counter argument would be, if one sloka from Sankshipta Ramayanam about Rama Ravana Yuddha is elaborated into a separate kanda called as Yuddha Kanda, then why not these 7 slokas elaborating about how was Ramarajya can be proportionally translated into Uttara Kanda. So Uttara Kanda could be very much an authentic work of Valmiki Maharshi himself and an integral part of Sri Ramayanam. Up next is the third point of analysis, that is the Mahabharata. Sri Ramayana and Mahabharata are considered as the 2 itihasas of Bharat. So what is Mahabharata saying about Sri Ramayana? There are 2 instances where the whole of Sri Ramayana is narrated in Mahabharata. As an integral part of Mahabharata, Sri Ramayana is also narrated. Hope you know that from a timeline standpoint, it is first Sri Ramayana that has happened and then came the age of Mahabharata. Of the 2, the first instance where Sri Ramayana is narrated as part of Mahabharata is by Hanuman. Coming to the exact references, as part of Mahabharata, the Vana Parva, in that there is another subdivision called as Tirthayatra Parva, and as part of that, from Adhyayas 146 and 147, these 2 chapters elaborate the encounter between Hanuman and Bhima, and as part of that, Hanuman narrates the entire story of Sri Ramayana to Bhima. And the second instance is Markandeya Maharshi. He narrates the entire Ramayana to Yudhishthira, and as part of the same Vana Parva, under the sub-parva of Draupadi Harana Parva, Adhyayas 272 to 290 in 18 long chapters, 18 long chapters, Sri Ramayanam is extensively elaborated as part of Mahabharata by Markandeya Maharshi to Yudhishthira. Guess what? Both these narrations ends with Sri Rama's coronation as a king, and there is no mention of Uttara Kanda following the coronation of Sri Rama as a king of Ayodhya. Both Hanuman and Markandeya Maharshi narrates the entire story of Sri Ramayanam, and their narration ends with the final chapter where Rama kills Ravana and then returns to Ayodhya along with Sita, eventually getting coronated as the king of Ayodhya, and that's where the narration ends in both these instances by Hanuman and Markandeya Maharshi. There is no mention about Uttara Kanda further. So we could potentially draw our argument saying that Uttara Kanda is not authentic, with Mahabharata as a strong and undisputable reference. But wait, it's not that simple. There is a counter argument for this as well. If we take a deeper look into Markandeya Maharshi's narration of 18 chapters, and if you go a little above, before he starts the whole of Sri Ramayanam, Markandeya Maharshi starts his narration with a prologue on the atrocities done by Ravanasura. And all these details about Ravanasura are not from the 6 kandas of Valmiki Ramayanam, but from the 7th kanda, which is Uttara Kanda. So even though the narration of Markandeya Maharshi appears to be like ending with Rama becoming the king of Ayodhya, at the very beginning of his narration, Markandeya Maharshi elaborated a lot of details about Ravanasura from Uttara Kanda. So if one had to consider Mahabharata as absolute sacrosanct and totally reliable account to the last word, then Mahabharata has instances from Uttara Kanda, and that stands stiff as a counter argument. So if you say that Uttara Kanda is not real and myth, then you are inherently saying that parts of Mahabharata is also a myth, because they also quote instances from Uttara Kanda. And needless to say that Mahabharata is written by the great Veda Vyasa Maharshi. Up next is the 4th point of analysis, which is from a very highly reliable account, which is the Padma Purana, written by Veda Vyasa Maharshi. And Padma Purana internally is divided into 7 khandas, and they are Srushti Khanda, Bhumi Khanda, Swarga Khanda, Brahma Khanda, Patala Khanda, Uttara Khanda, and Kriya Yoga Sara Khanda. These are the 7 sections of Padma Purana, of which Srishti Khanda, Patala Khanda and Uttara Khanda, these 3 parts of Padma Purana, has references from Sri Ramayanam. And by extension, the entirety of Padma Purana revolves around Sri Mahavishnu. And guess what? Padma Purana is very astonishing because Padma Purana details only Uttara Ramayanam at length as part of Patala Khanda from Adhyayas 1 to 68. The 68 chapters, only and only Uttara Ramayanam is detailed as part of Padma Purana. And if you say that Uttara Ramayanam is myth, then we should also say that Padma Puranam is also a myth. And as part of Uttara Khanda of Padma Puranam, Adhyayas 242 to 244, the details of Sri Ramayanam are mentioned in a brief manner. And by extension, as part of Srishti Khanda as well, from Adhyayas 33 to 37, there are certain instances from Uttara Ramayanam as part of Padma Puranam. But especially the point number 1, Patala Khanda. This has 68 chapters exclusively elaborating only and only Uttara Ramayanam. So I'll leave that up to you to make your opinion. Up next is the 5th point of analysis, which is from Skanda Purana. And this Skanda Purana is the longest of all the 18 Puranas, again written by Vedavyasa Maharshi. As part of Skanda Purana, there is one chapter or section called as Vaishnava Khanda, and this is very important in our current context. As part of Vaishnava Khanda, there is a subdivision called as Ayodhya Mahatmya, which details about the greatness of this place called Ayodhya. And as part of that, there are details both from Sri Ramayanam, the 6 books, as well as Uttara Ramayanam in Skanda Purana. So Skanda Purana essentially has the details from Uttara Ramayanam as well, part of this section called as Ayodhya Mahatmya. And just in case if you are not aware, in the Ram Janmabhoomi case, Skanda Puranam played an incredibly important role establishing the facts about Ayodhya and Ram Janmabhoomi. It takes 30 seconds to find out and download the Supreme Court judgment on Ram Janmabhoomi. Try it for yourselves and read how many times Skanda Puranam is quoted as part of this judgment. So that is Skanda Puranam for you, standing as a strong argument that Uttara Kanda or Uttara Ramayanam is authentic and is for real. Moving to the 6th point of analysis, a relatively softer point, but still an important one. There are many ancient temples which have incidents from Sri Ramayanam and Mahabharatam carved on the walls of these ancient temples. Take this one for instance. This is from Ellora's Kailash temple. The complete Ramayana is carved into one wall, just like a mural. But this entire story narration stops with Rama killing Ravana and Rama becoming the king of Ayodhya. There is no depiction of any instances from Uttara Ramayana. Not just here. Generally, in how many cases did you really find instances from Uttara Ramayana, like Rama being with his sons Lava and Kusha being carved on the walls of these ancient temples? I don't want to categorically say that they are never carved, but of all the instances that we have seen, or at least I have seen, Uttara Ramayana is never depicted in any of the carvings or in the photos or anywhere. And this argument says that Uttara Ramayana could possibly be not authentic. Up next is the 7th point of analysis, which are the British archives. During the times when India was under the colonization of the British, they took control of a lot of ancient Indian manuscripts, the actual palm leaf manuscripts. They kind of collected all those and made a cache of all the knowledge sources, and they exported it to the United Kingdom. And what you are seeing is one such book, which is a catalogue of all the manuscripts that are collected from the southern part of India. And this book, which is kind of a list of all the manuscripts that were taken away from India, it was published back in 1902. That's almost more than 120 years ago. And this book quotes that there was also a manuscript, a palm leaf manuscript of the entire Sri Ramayanam, which was taken into the British possession, which were a couple of hundreds of years old. And these manuscript of Sri Ramayanam has only 6 kandas. There is no Uttara Kanda as part of this ancient handwritten palm leaves. There was no Uttara Kanda. It just has 6. So that gives us a little clue to possibly say that Uttara Kanda was a prakship and not the part of actual Valmiki Sri Ramayanam, based on this manuscript collection, which were a couple of hundreds of years old. So as per these British archives, the handwritten manuscripts of Sri Valmiki Maharshi's Sri Ramayanam has only 6 chapters. We could put forward an argument saying that Uttara Kanda could possibly be not authentic. But wait, it is still not that simple. There is a counter argument as well. In the same catalogue, in the same book basically, when the British took possession of all these manuscripts, there is a separate manuscript completely separate from these 6 manuscripts. And that separate manuscript is called as Uttara Ramayanam, also claimed to be written by Valmiki Maharshi. And this Uttara Ramayanam, which is handwritten on palm leaves, is also a couple of hundreds of years old. And with that, a counter argument can be well put forward, saying that Uttara Ramayanam is very well authentic. Whatever the argument may be, but the question continues to haunt. Why is that Uttara Ramayanam always separate from the 6 chapters, but still continues to be found in all these other authentic sources like Mahabharata or Padma Purana or Skanda Purana and so on and so forth? Anyways, let's proceed. Moving to the 8th point of analysis, the most reliable retelling sources of Sri Ramayanam. As you know, there are hundreds of versions of Sri Ramayanam in many languages, in Bharat, in the Indian subcontinent, as well as in the Southeast Asian countries. And 2 such retelling sources stand out to be very credible, or relatively credible than any other sources. Number 1 is Ramcharitamanas, written by Goswami Tulsidas in Awadhi language. And the second one is Ramavataram, written by Kamban in Tamil. Both these accounts are a couple of hundreds of years old, as you can see, and they are direct translations of Sri Valmiki Maharshi's Sri Ramayanam. And very interestingly, both these translations does not have Uttara Kanda. You might say that Ramcharitamanas has Uttara Kanda, but just try to compare the contents of Ramcharitamanas Uttara Kanda versus what's claimed to be Valmiki Maharshi's Uttara Kanda. They are completely different. So coming back to these most reliable retelling sources, what we can possibly say is Uttara Kanda is not authentic because they are not translated by these great scholars. And we could put forward an argument saying that Uttara Kanda is possibly not authentic. Coming to the 9th point of analysis, the name of Uttara Kanda. Just take a look at the names of all the 6 Kandas. All the 6 Kandas are named in such a way that they represent the central subject of that specific Kanda. Bala Kanda, for instance, it's all about the childhood of Sri Rama. Ayodhya Kanda is all about the incidents that happened in Ayodhya during the planned coronation of Sri Rama. Same way, Aranya Kanda represents the exile of Sri Rama and Sita and Lakshmana. Kishkinda Kanda represents the events that happened in the kingdom of Kishkinda. Sundara Kanda represents the beauty of Lanka, which is the central subject in this chapter. And finally, the 6th one, Yuddha Kanda, which obviously is representing the war in itself. There is one common pattern in the naming convention of all the 6 Kandas. They represent the subject or the central subject of that specific Kanda. Now take a look at the naming convention of Uttara Kanda. The word Uttara means next, onward, progression. These are the connotations that are generally attributed to the word Uttara. So going by the naming patterns of all these 6, since Uttara Kanda broadly talks about Sri Rama's reign as a king, shouldn't it be named something like Sri Ramarajya Kanda? That sounds apt and in line with the other 6. But Uttara Kanda, the chapter of the next, it is absolutely offbeat and stands as odd man out. Going by the naming convention, it apparently gives a feel that this Uttara Kanda was not written by or at least named by Valmiki Maharshi. 6 chapters are named in one way, and this alone is named in a totally different manner. Maybe we could put forward an argument saying that Uttara Kanda is not authentic. But by the way, who called this Kanda as Uttara Kanda in first place? Where is it written? For the remaining 6, at the beginning of each and every sarga, it is clearly written saying that it belongs to a specific Kanda. So that's undisputable. But coming to Uttara Kanda, where is it called as Uttara Kanda? The next point of analysis clears it out. And finally comes the 10th and last point of analysis, the big open secret. Now this one point will completely change your perception about Uttara Kanda. Chaturvimshat Sahasrani Slokana Muktavan Rushihi तथा sargashatan pancha shatkandani tadhottaram. This slokam is from Sri Ramayanam, Balakanda, 4th Sarga, 2nd slokam. And the translation is, Sage Valmiki composed the Ramayanam in 24,000 slokas in 500 sargas across 6 kandas and followed by an Uttara Kanda. Valmiki Maharshi, he himself clearly wrote in Balakanda, 4th sarga, 2nd sloka, saying that he wrote the entire Ramayanam in 6 kandas plus 1 Uttara Kanda. Hands down, and I rest my case. But yeah, it needs a little more elaboration. So let's go word by word translation of this sloka. Chaturvimshat Sahasrani, that is 24,000 in Sanskritam. Slokanam, slokas. Uktavan, recited. Rishihi, sage Valmiki. Pancha Sarga Shatan, 500 sargas. Shat Kandani, 6 kandas. Tadha, and Uttaram, and there is an Uttara, which is called as Uttara Kanda. After almost searching for 1 month for many references across, and then I came to read about this slokam in Valmiki Ramayana, and I was just speechless. It is straightforward, written in black and white in Valmiki Ramayana itself, saying that there is an Uttara Kanda. So what's the debate about? You pick up the version that you want, but just make sure that you pick up only Valmiki Maharshi's Sri Ramayanam translation in whichever language that you want. Here I'm just flashing it in English, where it clearly says that there is an epilogue with the name Uttara Kanda. Pause and read if you want. And here is a Hindi version from Gita Press, which is highly reliable account of Valmiki Maharshi's Sri Ramayanam. And this is the translation of the 4th Sarga, 2nd slokam from Balakanda. इनमें महर्षि ने 24,000 श्लोक, 500 सर्ग तथा उत्तर सहित, I repeat the word, उत्तर सहित 7 खंडों का प्रतिपादन किया है. If you look at the Sanskritam words, Shat Kandani, that means 6 kandas, Tadha and Uttaram, and Uttara Kanda. And if you take it in Telugu, here is the translation. వాల్మీకి మహర్షి 24,000 శ్లోకములను మరియు 500 సర్గలను 6 కాండలను మరియు ఉత్తర కాండమును చెప్పెను. ఇది టీకా. తాత్పర్యపరంగా చూస్తే కనుక 24,000 శ్లోకాలను 6 కాండల రామాయణంలో 500 సర్గలలో మరియు ఒక ఉత్తరకాండను చెప్పాను. ఇది దీని అర్థం. And in the same chapter, same sarga, there is another instance where Uttara Ramayanam is specifically called out. And here is this translation. So finally there we get to the last leg of this long documentary, the conclusion. With 0.00% room for any perceptions whatsoever, here is the conclusion. If Valmiki Maharshi is the author of 6 kandas of Sri Ramayanam, then he is also the author of Uttara Kanda as well. Period. Absolute period. And the reason I called the 10th point as the big open secret is, it is just lying out there in black and white in the very first chapters of Ramayana itself. And just imagine how much of debate, controversies, contentions, etc. around Uttara Ramayanam. But then why did I explain almost 9 more points in different scriptures and different references and all about that? Well, that is very relevant, and I'll tell you why. Here is the thing. We just could conclude that Valmiki Maharshi also wrote an Uttara Kanda, but we don't know the contents of Uttara Kanda for sure. That is the main problem. Why is that Valmiki Maharshi in first place did not write this 7th book of Uttara Kanda as a continuum to Yuddha Kanda itself? Why is that it's always called out separately? Of the many resources and references that we have seen, Uttara Kanda always stands separate from these 6 chapters of Sri Ramayana. You will not find it on the carvings on the temples. The palm leaf manuscripts are also separate. Other reliable resources like Ramcharitmanas or Kamba Ramayanam or many other versions does not cite anything about Uttara Ramayanam. There are many universities and institutions in Bharat and around the world preserving Valmiki Maharshi's Sri Ramayanam. But then that preservation always limits to the 6 chapters but never the Uttara Kanda. So like that, you can find a lot of offbeats and odd man out scenarios with Uttara Kanda quite a lot. So till now, what we could conclude is Uttarakanda is very much an integral part of Sri Ramayanam, but the contents of Uttara Ramayanam are still a question. However, a reasonable reconstruction of Uttarakanda can be done from other very trustworthy resources like Padma Purana, Skanda Purana and Mahabharata. And to establish these kind of points, I had to elaborate all these 9 different analysis points about Uttara Ramayana. So this is it. Is Uttara Ramayanam or Uttarakanda for real or a myth? No, it is not a myth. It is real. Going with the assumption that if Valmiki Maharshi's Sri Ramayana is real, then Uttarakanda has to be real. But let us take a quick look at the contents of Uttara Ramayanam. Often people who worship Sri Ram, they tend to disagree that Uttarakanda is for real, because these incidents, as per their perception, brings down the character of Sri Ram. And that is the reason people deny that Uttara Ramayanam is part of the larger Sri Ramayanam. And for sake of completeness, I added 2 more instances, that is killing of Vali and Sita Agni Pravesha. These 5 instances or incidents are often perceived to be very contentious, and Sri Ram, who is revered as Maryada Purushottam, which means the noble and ideal man, and these 5 instances apparently are perceived to be a kind of a negative blots on his character. But is it really so? Are these 5 really negative aspects about Sri Ram, or is it a lack of our understanding? Let's try to understand that. The first one is killing of Vali. Why Sri Rama had to kill Vali in stealth? References 16, 17 and 18 sargas of Kishkinda Kanda. That's where you will find the actual reason why he had to kill in stealth. As I highlighted here, Mrugayam Dharma. For a king, as part of hunting, it is virtuously acceptable to hunt an animal by hiding in stealth, which in this case, you are that animal, Vali. These are the words of Sri Ram to Vali. And in fact, Vali asks Sri Ram, why is that Sri Ram killed him from behind the bushes? And there are 3 long chapters, 16, 17, 18, 3 long chapters, where Sri Ram clearly explains to Vali why he had to kill Vali from behind the bushes. There are a lot of atrocities that Vali committed, not just on his brother, but on many other people. And to punish Vali for his crimes, as a king, Sri Ram hunts Vali just like he is hunting an animal behind the bushes. So it pretty much fits into the dharmic framework. And as far as dharma is concerned, this is not seen as a blot on the character of Sri Ram. And these are not my words. What I just said is straight out of Valmiki Ramayana, out of these very chapters, 16, 17, 18, Kishkinda Kanda. So people, without going through these chapters, they kind of quickly jump to a conclusion or a kind of a contention saying that, no, this was not appropriate of Sri Ram. Re-emphasizing the atheistic standpoint, which I would like to still retain, even at this moment. My only point is, read the scriptures and then make your opinions. That's about it. The second one is Sita's Agni Pravesham. For those of you who are not aware of the sequence, basically when Ravana was killed by Sri Ram and Sita was released from her abduction, Sri Rama says that, Sita, now you are free and you can go wherever you want. I cannot take back you as my wife. These are the words of Sri Ram. And for such harsh words, she resorts to a suicide by entering into fire. This is the sequence. But why did Sri Ram spoke to Sita in such a harsh manner? I clearly gave the references here. And the highlighted word says that Janavada Bhayat. Sri Rama was very concerned about the fear of the talk of public. What would public say, his people say, if he take back Sita, who was in the abduction of an Asura for almost 1 year. Now before we becoming moral police and trying to judge Sri Ramayanam, just look at our own society. How low people talk of man or a woman, any kind of a relationship. How is it different? It was exactly same back then. And Sri Ram is not an ordinary man. He is about to become the emperor of Ikshvaku dynasty. So obviously a high social obligation. That's what has kept him from accepting Sita back. But what is very important is, yes, he spoke in a very harsh manner to Sita. But one should really read those words and understand the meaning of those harsh words. Let's try and do that. The second reference is about that exactly. Read the translation. Deepo netraturasyeва pratikulasi. Just like how the light of fire is unacceptable for a deceased eye, you are not acceptable to me. These are the harsh words that were spoken by Sri Rama to Sita. But try and understand literally the meaning of it. Just like how the light of fire is unacceptable for a deceased eye. So in comparison, Sita is being compared with the light of fire, and Rama himself is comparing himself with a person with a deceased eye. You are not acceptable to me. There, it does not mean that Rama has a deceased eye or he has any doubt on Sita. Just read the above slokam, what it says. Janavada bhayat. That is the root cause. And because of that, he was skeptical to accept Sita. Again, this is what the scriptures say, and you are free to make your opinions. But my only point is, read and then make your opinions. Don't base your opinions on some TV serials or movies, the way they depict. It's saying that it's an Agni Pariksha. Agni Pariksha and Agni Pravesa has hell lot of difference. After hearing such kind of painful words from her own husband, she was totally shattered, and then she resorts to a suicide. That's the sequence of events, and that's how things played out. And then comes the third contention about the character of Sri Rama, the most important of all, Sita Parityaga, a moment where Sri Rama renounces Sita into jungle. According to Uttara Kanda or Uttara Ramayanam, this is what the specific shloka that narrates the people's talk, what people are talking about Sri Rama. These are literally the words. I'll read and you try to understand, because I cannot translate word by word. The language is so horrible. Kidrushe hrudaye tasya sita sambhogajam sukham angamaropya hi pura ravanena baladrutam. And here is a very subtle translation of this slokam. How could Rama have a pleasant personal life with Sita, who was abducted by Ravana, who made her sit on his thigh during her abduction? These words are the words of the people of Ayodhya or the kingdom of Sri Rama back then. They were literally talking so very low about the personal and private lives of Sri Rama and Sita. What do you expect an emperor to do in this kind of situation? As a husband or as an emperor, which one takes priority? He chose the later. And in Sanskritam, that is called as dharma or Raja Dharma. And that is the reason why he had to renounce Sita. Now this is from Uttara Ramayanam. Just because the situation is emotionally very disturbing, one cannot deny that this is prakshipt. Whether it is prakshipt or not is secondary. But if you just analyze literally the words the way they are, it is such a horrible language that people are speaking about the king. So I come back to the same point. Read the scriptures, read the word-to-word translations, or if you know Sanskritam, read it in the word-to-word manner, and then make your opinions. Moving to another contention about Uttara Ramayanam, that is about Lakshmana's death. Most of us might not be aware of this sequence of events, so let me brief it out simply. One day, a sage, a rishi, comes to Sri Rama and says that he wants to talk to Sri Rama in private, and anybody who listens to that conversation or interrupts their conversation should be killed by Sri Rama. This is the vow that Rishi takes from Sri Rama before getting into that personal conversation. So what happens is, Sri Rama orders Lakshmana to guard the door and make sure that nobody enters into the room where the Rishi and Sri Rama are in that conversation. But with a very unfortunate turn of events, Lakshmana had to barge into the conversation, and he himself, despite being the guard, he interrupts the conversation, which eventually forces Sri Rama to kill Lakshmana. But he did not kill Lakshmana. He just stands devastated, because he came into a moment where, because of his word, to follow his dharma, he has to kill his own brother. At that point, Lakshmana voluntarily leaves Sri Rama and goes far away from the kingdom and eventually ends his life. Under those circumstances, Sri Rama becomes a direct reason for the death of Lakshmana. But again, come what may, here the priority is not about the human emotions. The priority is only and only dharma for Sri Rama. And that is the reason why people worship this man even till today, revering him as Maryada Purushottam. The fifth and last contention about Uttara Ramayanam is Sri Rama killing Shambhuka. Now this might trigger reasonably some of us, but hold on and then try to understand the real meaning of the scriptural words. Let me brief the events in a simple manner to understand this context. During Sri Rama Rajya, which is always seen to be very prosperous and happy, suddenly at one point in time, certain unfortunate events start happening. And when they try to understand why is it happening so, apparently Narada Maharshi, he comes to Sri Rama and says that somewhere somebody in your Rajya is performing adharma. The word adharma means dharma is responsibility. Fulfilling your responsibility is dharma. Adharma is doing something more or less which is not fulfilling your responsibility. That is called as adharma. So somebody is performing adharma in your Rajya and you have to go and correct it. Then Sri Rama sets out to find out where is this adharma happening or going on. Then he finds out a person who kind of performs a tapasya in an upside down position, and his name is Shambhuka, and he is of Sudra Varna. It is highly inappropriate to translate a Varna to a caste, but in modern parlance it is called as caste, but it is not caste, it is a Varna. So he is a Sudra, and according to the dharma of that times, it is forbidden for a Sudra to perform tapasya. So that is the reason Rama kills Shambhuka, correcting the adharma. Now at the face of it, it sounds highly atrocious. Why Sri Rama had to kill a person who was just performing tapasya? That's what we think of, right? But hold on your thoughts. Let us go straight to the book written by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar ji. The title of the book is Annihilation of Caste, where he heavily criticizes the caste-based oppression. First things first, caste-based oppression is a bloodied reality in India. Still today, there are many people who are getting oppressed in the name of caste. So let's park that for a second and try to understand this situation where why Sri Rama killed Shambhuka. Read what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar wrote in his book about the annihilation of caste about this incident. Sri Rama's kingdom was based on a Chaturvarna system. That means the four Varnas: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Sudra. And fundamental point is the Varna of a person is not decided by the birth. The Chaturvarna system was a socio-economic governance structure that was prevalent in ancient Bharat for thousands of years. In modern world, in today's world, even in Bharat, this is absolutely not relevant for us. That does not mean that we find fault with what has happened in Bharat over thousands of years ago. Until and unless we understand how this Chaturvarna system used to work, you cannot make any assumptions out of it. Anyways, coming back to this incident of Rama killing Shambhuka, read what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is saying about this incident, and then you will understand. Let me give you a simple example to understand. The Constitution of India, which was first published in 1956, do you think that that exact copy, the first edition, is valid today? Absolutely not, because there are hundreds of amendments that have gone into it. It evolves with time. Same way, the Chaturvarna system, which was there back then thousands of years ago, you cannot judge the rules of that system in modern parlance. It would be absolute stupidity. So you cannot judge the fact that, oh, Sri Rama killed Shambhuka, a Sudra. So is this a caste-based oppression? No. But having said that, even today there are caste-based oppression heavily that is still prevalent in the society. But you cannot connect that incident of Sri Rama killing Shambhuka to modern days problems. They are totally two different things. So as you can see, these are very subtle and sensitive topics that are there in Uttara Ramayanam. And it has to be understood very clearly with a lot of nuances. At the face of it, it looks so very atrocious. But the real essence of it is very dharmic in nature. So that is the reason Uttara Ramayanam is not so very easy to read and understand. At least that is my take. Okay, let's get back to that very contentious slokam of Uttarakanda itself. That moment when Narada Maharshi says to Sri Rama, saying that there is some adharma happening and a Sudra is performing a tapasya, which he should not be doing it. Let us get straight to that slokam, and I'm sure you will be surprised. 74th Sarga of Uttarakanda, 27th Slokam. Sorry, I could not get a Hindi version or a Sanskrit version. I could just get only Telugu one. But I gave the translation below in English. And those of you who know Telugu can read it for yourself. O Sri Rama, a Sudra should not perform penance in Treta Yuga. But in Kali Yuga, a Sudra can perform a penance. So basically, according to the times of that period, which is in Treta Yuga, a Sudra is forbidden to perform a penance. And this person, Shambhuka, has violated that and is performing a penance. But in Kali Yuga, which is in today's world, the times what we are in now, a Sudra can perform a tapasya. It is one slokam. The first line says that he cannot perform in Treta Yuga, a Sudra cannot perform it in Treta Yuga. And the second line says that the person can perform, a Sudra can perform tapasya in Kali Yuga. Now the second line, nobody knows it. Only the first line people read saying that, okay, the Sudra should not perform a tapasya, and people go hysteric about it and say that, okay, it's a caste-based oppression, etc., etc., and all that stuff. But why don't people read the second line of the same sloka which says that a Sudra can perform a tapasya in Kali Yuga? See, these are the results of motivated political or religious ideologue. It is as simple as that. As I said, the incidents in Uttara Ramayanam are very difficult to understand unless we get to the depth of each and every word and try to read the Sri Ramayanam or Uttara Ramayanam for ourselves, and only then we'll be able to understand. Otherwise, looking at the face of it, oh, Rama abandoned his wife to jungle, he has not taken care as a husband. Or Rama killed a person who is just performing tapasya. These things, as a knee-jerk reaction, sounds to be very atrocious. But until and unless one get to the depth of the scripture and read the words and understand the essence, the real meaning is very difficult to grasp. And that is the reason people often jump to the conclusions that Uttara Ramayanam is very contentious or controversial, and that is the reason it is a prakship, it is not part of Ramayana. No, not at all. And you have seen all the story for the last 1 hour for yourself. So that is Uttara Ramayanam as part of the larger Sri Ramayana, a less known story about a well-known story. Put in the facts, research, analysis, all these things aside. And now stepping out of my atheistic standpoint, which I have assumed till now, coming back to that one pertinent question, why is that Sri Ramayanam so very popular across Bharat for billions of people over thousands of years is? Dharma. Ramo Vigrahavan Dharma. Come what may in life, one has to stick to one's responsibilities and keep moving forward. This has been the message of both Bhagavan Sri Ram and Sita Ma through their incredibly painful lives, but still sticking on to Dharma throughout their lives. And that is also the reason why billions of people over thousands of years, even today in Bharat, it is virtually impossible to find a town or a village or a city without a Ramalayam. Sri Ramayanam shaped the very ethos of India to the core and will continue to be the cultural backbone of Bharat. Jai Sri Rama. And as always, thanks for watching.